Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something truly profound. What we're looking at is a personal journal that chronicles the very first 15 days of a person's retirement, specifically August 1st through the 15th of 2026. But I promise you right now, this is definitely not your typical list of golf games and beach naps. What we actually have here is a complete masterclass in psychological transformation, viewed through the highly specialized lens of professional, narrative-oriented career counseling analysis. We're going to unpack exactly how a human being dismantles decades of deeply ingrained habits to rediscover who they actually are when the daily grind finally stops. It is a rapid, intense period of physical deceleration and psychological reconstruction, so let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this idea right here. The train of working life has arrived at the station. I mean, what a perfectly vivid way to set the stage, right? You see, society usually frames retirement as just, a long vacation, like a permanent weekend. But the author of this journal experienced it as a sudden, definitive stop to this massive, overwhelming momentum. Imagine a heavy freight train that has just been hurtling down the tracks for 40 years. That's the working self. When it finally pulls into the station, the silence isn't just relaxing, it's almost deafening. Throughout this explainer, we're treating this 15-day window not as a holiday, but as a deeply reflective psychological journey. To really get what's happening here, we are using the framework of professional, narrative-oriented career counseling analysis. Now, I know that sounds like a mouthful, but the core concept is actually incredibly elegant. In narrative therapy, the belief is basically that we live our lives through the stories we tell about ourselves. And for most of our adulthood, the main storyline is totally dictated by our careers, right? We're the achiever, the provider, the problem solver. What this 15-day journal captures is the exact real-time psychological process of transitioning from a rigid, outcome-based working self to a fluid, undefined living self. It is quite literally the rewriting of a life story. So, Section 1, Farewell Work Identity. Let's look at how one actually begins to deconstruct a 40-year-old dominant storyline. Well, the journal kicks off not at home, but on a transition trip to Bangkok and the Kanchanaburi Death Railway in Thailand. And this wasn't just some random vacation spot. The railway symbolizes speed, construction, grueling effort, and eventually closure. It perfectly mirrored the past several decades of our author's life. Decades spent just pushing forward, completing tasks, and holding everything together. By ending the trip at this historical site of destruction and resolution, the author was essentially participating in a massive psychological ritual. It officially marked the end of scheduled routines, endless itineraries, and that relentless, everyday pressure to perform. Then, right after getting back home, another really pivotal moment hits. The author goes to a formal dinner with their son's girlfriend and her Scottish parents. Now, on the surface, this might just seem like a standard family dinner, but in our narrative analysis, it represents a huge generational shift. For decades, the author's identity was totally anchored as the father, the teacher, the central director of the life stage, right? Always caring for and shaping the next generation. But sitting at that table, watching their adult son bridge two families and two cultures, the author realized they literally didn't need to control the stage anymore. They could just step back, become a companion and a witness, and officially take their place in the previous generation. Moving into phase 2, deconstruct time concepts. This is all about finding a new rhythm. I want you to just take a mental breath here, because this phase requires a complete deceleration of the body and mind. There is a stark contrast between how we currently live and how this author had to adapt. On one hand, we have purpose-driven time. Every single hour has a utility. We go to meetings, we process tasks, we turn our time into tangible results. But during these 15 days, the author ventured alone into the mountains and hidden streams of Joxi, and they started practicing the radical, quiet act of experiencing purposeless time, just walking, just listening to music, or simply sitting. The profound realization here is that you don't actually need to turn every experience into an accomplishment. Sitting itself became a completely valid, complete activity. Now, what's really interesting is how nature provided the absolute perfect metaphor for this shift. The author took a trip to the zoo, but instead of rushing frantically from exhibit to exhibit, they stopped and deeply observed the crocodiles and hippos. They noticed how a crocodile only shows this tiny fraction of its massive body above the water. The rest is completely submerged, quiet, perfectly still. It just waits. It doesn't constantly act. For someone used to constantly solving problems and visibly doing things, this submerged crocodile became a brand new anchor. It showed them that, hey, you can just observe life rather than constantly trying to fix it. Just let this realization breathe for a second. You don't always have to be doing things. Life is still happening. It's such a simple sentence, right? But for a high achiever who is shedding decades of intense career conditioning, it is an absolute revelation. Your value is no longer tied to your output. Now for phase 3, reconnect with body. We're looking at the physical recalibration process here. You see, the mind might understand that it's retired, but the body usually lags behind. The author participated in this really intense 3-day art therapy group. This involved working with clay, tape, restricting their movement like a mummy, and physically breaking out of a cocoon. It bypassed the intellectual brain entirely. And guess what happened? The author's body just completely crashed. They experienced extreme physical exhaustion and intense gastrointestinal distress. It was a harsh wake-up call, for sure. The mind had retired, but the body was still desperately trying to run on willpower. This provided a crucial lesson for them. Moving forward, the body's limits would dictate the schedule, not the mind's ambitions. The era of forcing the body to comply was officially over. As that physical body recalibrated, something incredible happened. Phase 4. Listen to unconscious. This is where the dreams take over. Over these 15 days, when the logical mind finally powered down, the author experienced an absolute explosion of vivid, cinematic dreams. And we aren't talking about your typical stress dreams about showing up to a meeting late. These were deeply symbolic. Fast-flowing rivers, staircases entirely missing their handrails, giant fish, and perhaps most strikingly, animals frozen deep within a forest. In a narrative analysis, we don't view these as just random mental residue. This is the unconscious mind actively taking over the navigation of life. The missing handrails symbolize the loss of that rigid career structure, while the rivers and oceans represent a beautiful return to natural, fluid movement. And this brilliantly illustrates something essential. During a career, you're usually forced into a single, cohesive persona. But the author documented feeling wildly contradictory emotions, extreme exhaustion and excitement, a huge desire to socialize, and then a desperate need for absolute isolation. Retirement creates this beautiful internal complexity. You just don't have to be one thing anymore. The distinguished professor, the child playing in the mud, the lively socializer, and the quiet mountain hermit can all safely coexist within the very same person. You are allowed to be wonderfully fragmented. Of course, this new, multifaceted self requires a totally new way of learning. A trip to the Taipei Fine Arts Museum proved to be a major turning point here. Instead of the old, rigid academic model, learning now starts directly with raw life and sensory experience. This naturally sparks curiosity, leading to direct encounters with art, which is then processed and synthesized organically. It's like the whole world becomes a new syllabus-free university. It is a completely free, self-directed model of existing in the world. We are now reaching the emotional peak of this entire journey. Phase 5, life thawing period, returning to life. This right here is the ultimate cognitive shift. It's the move from arranging life to generating life. At the very beginning of the 15 days, the author was still using their old corporate vocabulary, asking what they should plan, what they should learn, where they should go next. They were literally trying to control retirement like it was a project. But by day 15, the vocabulary had completely transformed. It became, if I want to go to the coast, I'll go. When I feel tired, I will turn around. It is this profound surrender of control, allowing life to organically generate itself day by day based on true, authentic feeling. Remember those frozen animals in the forest from the author's dreams? Well, the author realized that those animals represented parts of their own soul, parts that had been frozen solid for decades just for the sake of survival, responsibility, and career advancement. This 15-day period was the thaw. The ice was finally cracking. Ultimately, this whole transition is simply the journey of taking a working person and slowly, gently, returning them to a living person. So let's actually map out this incredible psychological journey we've analyzed today. You leave the old structure. You meet new experiences and shifting dynamics. You allow your body to truly tire and crash. You sit in silence and actually feel your complex emotions. And finally, you begin to regenerate. The central takeaway here is a massive inversion of power. Think about it. For 40 years, this person was an absolute expert at changing the world around them. In these 15 days, they finally stopped, stepped back, and allowed the world to change them. Which brings us to our final thought. Whether you are retiring next month, or you literally have decades left in your career, the principles of narrative career counseling apply to all of us right now. Are you only allowing yourself to exist as a working person? Are parts of you frozen in the forest, just waiting for the ice to melt? We really have to ask ourselves, Where is your life's train heading right now? And honestly, more importantly, who will you be when it finally arrives at the station? Thank you so much for exploring this remarkable journal with me today. Catch you next time.